Bonnie there, and there we go.
Perfect. Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure over the next minute or two we're going to have more people joining, so I might say hello a couple of times. Welcome on International Women's Day 2021. Thank you for being here. This event is for everybody, allies, those with lived experience, professionals, students. Together we are definitely more than the sum of our parts. And so although tonight we choose to challenge, this is a place to share, to be compassionate, to have an inclusive conversation. We're all working towards similar goals, right? We want to stop anyone feeling like suicide is a viable option, and we want to do all we can to reduce the incidence of suicide across all our communities. My name's Debbie Roberts. I'm the CEO at the OLLIE Foundation. We're a suicide prevention charity. Along with Team OLLIE, who might be able to give you a wave, you might see some people right now waving at you. It is our pleasure to welcome you to this evening's panel event. We have an incredible panel here this evening, but I know as our audience, you'll be here with lived experience and professional experience. So I hope we can collaborate. I hope we can learn from each other. And I invite all of you as we go along, please feel free to populate the chat with book references, academic research, details of other organisations that are doing amazing things in this area. In doing so, you will be helping all of us and helping co-produce some of the content for the resource pack that will be sent to everyone after this evening's event. The panel is going to last for about an hour, and then we're going to have around 30 minutes for Q&A. Before I introduce our panel, let me just do some housekeeping. So Vicky, if you could give everyone a huge wave, that would be great. Vicky is available throughout the session. She's going to be looking at the chat, supporting you all. If your Wi-Fi drops out, she'll be the one letting you back in. But if you have any observations or comments or questions that you want to pose to the panel during the Q&A, can you pop them in the chat or send them directly to Vicky in the chat? You can do that privately. And Vicky will put those all together and then she will pose those questions to the panel. If for any reason we have more questions than we have time for, we will address those and we will get that sent out, those answers in the resource pack. I think everyone's mics are on mute, so thank you for that. We're going to keep you that way, I'm afraid, for the time being, just to ensure the quality of the sound for everybody. So in just a second, I'm going to introduce you all to Louise, Ian, Shanice, Hope, Jean and Bonnie. So Louise, can we start with you? Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Louise. I'm from the OLLIE Foundation. And before coming here, I did a master's in social epidemiology. And social epidemiology is the study of how our social environment impacts on our health. And while I was there, one of the things I studied was the gender differences in suicide and suicide behaviours and how this understanding comes through with our social experience of gender.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for being here tonight. Ian, I was hoping you'd be able to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hello, yes, hello to everybody, and very pleased to be here on this amazing event that the OLLIE Foundation have organised. I'm Ian Russell, as Debbie's just said, and the founder of another foundation, the Molly Rose Foundation. It's a charity we set up after the death of my youngest daughter, who died by suicide. Molly died in 2017, just 6 days before her 15th birthday. And prior to her death, she'd shown no obvious signs of mental ill health. After she died, we discovered that Molly had been viewing harmful content online. We saw posts that Molly had seen and liked and saved, which encouraged anxiety, depression, self-harm and suicide. So we set up the Molly Rose Foundation to help connect young people to the help and support that they need and to raise awareness about mental ill health and suicide. And along with many other charities, we've been urging the government to regulate the internet. So harmful content will be less easy to discover, and instead support and trusted advice will be found. And on this day of all days, I thought it would just be worth saying that although suicide might be thought of as a middle-aged male concern on many occasions, it's interesting to note that suicidal thoughts are more likely in young females than males. In the months leading to Molly's death, there was a survey that said that over a third of 16 to 24-year-old women as compared to less than 1 in 5 men of that age were thinking about suicide. So I think these are the sort of things that we'll no doubt be talking about as we go through the rest of this evening.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you so much for being here. Shanice, hi. I wondered if you would like to say hello.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Shanice. I run the blog The Happiest Depressed Girl on Instagram, and I'm currently studying for A-levels, hoping to go to university. And I'm here. I've worked with Ollie for a few different talks and things, and this topic today is one close to my heart, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Shanice. Jean, hello. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's a great honour to be here myself. I'm Dr. Jean Dillon. I'm a social work lecturer. I've been a social work lecturer for 21 years and also work as a mental health app manager, which I've done since 1998. And my son took his life in 2019. So although it's International Women's Day, obviously that informs my view of the world, but also I think I now have experienced myself of what it can feel like to be desperate. But one of the things I'm most concerned about are issues with Black communities. We've heard today about Meghan Markle, how suicidal she's been feeling and had felt. And what I'm particularly interested in is issues of intersectionality in terms of gender, class, race, and stereotypes around Black women, strong Black women, the mother figure, which sometimes I think results in a denial of Black women's needs. So that's my main focus today.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Jean. Risa, hello. Would you like to?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I will. Just like an American jumping in before you can finish your sentence. I'm Dr. Risa Stein. I'm a university professor in Kansas City, Missouri in the US. I've also started a nonprofit resource for college students called Genuine You, and I'm the CEO of Amica, which is a Internet of Things sort of organization where we provide proactive support to anyone who needs a little boost to help them get through the day knowing they have a circle around them, supportive of them, to whom or to which they also can contribute. My primary platform is socio-emotional support and making sure everybody feels connected to a community to retain a sense of personal purpose, hopefulness, and helpfulness. So thank you all for having me here with you today.
Oh, we're so thrilled you could join us. Thank you, Risa. Hi, Hope. Would you like to say hello?
Hi guys, you all right? My name's Hope. I'm one of the trustees of the Grace Deer Trust. The Grace Deer Trust was set up in memory of my sister, who sadly took her life in 2017. Primarily what the Grace Deer Trust does is support local schools around Surrey. We're partnered with 9 local schools providing funding for teacher training, counselling, and young people support. Reason why we're kind of so passionate more about young people is because my sister was actually struggling to the age of 13. She was self-harming from then, and it wasn't until she was about 23 until we started seeing signs and the cracks starting to show. So that's why we're kind of passionate about young people's mental health.
Thank you so much for being here, Hope, and sharing your views with us. And Bonnie, thank you for being here. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everyone. And well, it's such an honour to be here tonight and to be part of this vital discussion. And on today, actually, on International Women's Day, it's a great honour. I'm a psychodynamic counsellor, working in private practice, but I'm also a counsellor with Safe Space, which is with Hertfordshire County Council and Children's Services. It's a service that actually works with children and young people from the age of 5 to 25. Working in private practice, I work with young people and adults. And I'm, a big supporter of the OLLIE Foundation and the wonderful work they do, and have done the assist training. And this is, a subject very close to my heart, and I'm grateful to be here tonight. Thank you all for being here too.
Thank you, Bonnie. So I'm going to come to Louise first of all, and one of the questions we just wanted really to create a bit of a foundation for the rest of our conversation, which is just some thoughts about what you think is the most misunderstood piece when talking about suicide. And I wonder, Louise, if you want to pick that up for us.
Sure. So I think the most misunderstood thing about suicide in general is the fact that talking about it doesn't ever make it more likely to happen. It really just shows the person that you've asked that you care, that you're able to take them seriously, and that you're really willing to have those really hard conversations with them. And in terms of gender and suicide, I think a lot of people misunderstand how the data of the gender split in suicide can be skewed, both in the facts of the misreporting of causes of death for women, because women and girls are more likely to choose methods that can be interpreted as an accident, but also the fact that women and girls are more likely to choose methods that don't result in deaths. Meaning that if you look at sort of suicide attempts as opposed to just suicide deaths, the split would be a lot more balanced. And I think that that misrepresentation in the data means that our society's responses to suicide as an issue for women and girls is really falling short.
Okay, well, you've certainly kicked us off really beautifully. Thank you. I wondered if anyone else wanted to come in on that. So what do you feel from your experience and your understanding is misunderstood when we're thinking about suicide? Anyone else on the panel would like to pick that up?
Oh, sorry. Well, I think actually to really identify and look at furthermore into the links between self-harm and suicide, and to understand that actually long-term self-harm that actually does lead to very high rates of suicide. And I do know that actually 1 in 5 women will self-harm, and they're 3 times more likely to actually attempt suicide. So it's really important to, I suppose, look at services and what can help in terms of tapping into that area further, much more than we are, and really talking about it a lot more. And I think there is a conversation where, well, self-harm is self-harm. It's got nothing to do with suicide, but actually the links are quite big. And I think that's something that I think hopefully we can discuss and think about more. Sorry, Jean, I know you wanted to
that's fine.
talk about this.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lack of emotional literacy around suicide. And one of the things that caused me the most trauma was someone actually came to my house and said that was so selfish what your son did. And it really wounded me, because I thought, you have no idea what anyone feels like. And it's far from a selfish act. You know, in fact, I think they're not being selfish, you know, from the family's perspective. You know, I'm causing you a lot of worry or whatever. So it's a selfless thing sometimes. I think there needs to be more understanding. It's very complex, it's unique to the individual, but it's definitely not selfish.
Thank you. It's certainly within our training, it's something we always pick up on, and it's always something that people do struggle with, actually, that understanding.
It's also, I think, one of the things I've learned is it is a difficult subject to talk about. It's not the sort of thing you talk about at a dinner party. And it tends, of all deaths, death is a hard thing to talk about. Suicide is probably the hardest. And so it does tend to get swept under the carpet and disregarded. And it's really important that you do talk about it, because by having evenings like this and by people talking about it, the whole subject of suicide and the surrounding issues of any mental ill health that may have led people there become destigmatized. And then if people start talking about them, then help can be found. And it's a really important route to stop the dreadful statistics. I always remember a statistic I learned, that in the US, there are 3,000 15 to 18-year-olds, very narrow age range. There are 3,000 15 to 18-year-olds that attempt suicide every day. It's far too commonplace, and it needs to be talked about much more widely so that we can find solutions and lead people to the support that they need.
Thank you.
I was just going to jump in on that, on what Jean and Ian were saying. I think we as people try and have a common ground with someone, and we try to be able to relate. And I think speaking from losing my sister, a lot of my friends and family, you know, although they've not directly lost my sister to suicide, they tried to find that common ground. You know, when you say, oh yeah, I felt that when my granddad passed, you know, or I felt that, you know, when my mum passed. And I think it's something that we really struggle to do, because in our mind, it's kind of like, oh, I need to say something here. Whereas the best thing that you can do is just to stop, listen to how this conversation is going, instead of going, oh, I need to try and find something that I can relate to. You know, so I had a friend that lost his mum a few months ago to cancer. I've not lost my mum. I'm thankfully still have my mum here. And I think he was trying to find this common ground that, you know, losing his mum to cancer and losing my sister to suicide is, we kind of have both lost someone. And yes, that is correct. But actually, I've never lost my mum, so I don't actually know what it is you're feeling. We may be feeling the same grief and emotion, but actually, I think, yeah, we try and find this sort of common ground that we can do. And as Jean was saying, that sometimes that can come across with, you know, when someone goes, oh, that's selfish. And it's like, oh, if you just stopped, listened, and just sort of took what it is that Jean was saying about losing her son, you know, you wouldn't have had that sort of thing we call word vomit, where we just go, you know, and actually, instead of trying to be reassuring to someone, we've actually come across and offended them. So I think the sort of my biggest advice to people is, when you're in an uncomfortable position, and, you know, what Ian was saying is, yes, we should be talking about suicide and mental health. But if we're in a position where, you know, we're not sure what the right thing or wrong thing is to say, actually the biggest thing of saying, you know what, that's difficult, I'm here for you if you want to chat more, is a lot more powerful than someone going, oh, but so-and-so said this kind of thing. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we started to speak earlier, Louise, you kicked us off by saying that the way suicide might be recorded and the way different people might choose to end their life might skew some of the data we have. And I wondered if anybody wanted to come in on that, and particularly I'm thinking about in terms of policy, public health messages, and coroner reporting. Is there something there that you would share with the audience that you feel they should consider now? Jean, I can see you want to come in.
I was really shocked to find that the coroner's office doesn't record death by ethnicity. I was really shocked. I couldn't believe it. So we really do not know the true picture in terms of, you know, women or men from ethnic backgrounds in terms of what the suicide rates are. And I just couldn't understand why.
Has anyone else had experiences where they found themselves quite surprised in the way things are handled or recorded?
I think so. In the US, when we record, the CDC, our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, record deaths, the age group from, I believe it's 18 to 24, the top 3 causes of death are suicide, accident, and homicide. And I can't remember if it's in that order, but I think it is. And I think one of the most challenging aspects of that is recognizing that these are young people already that we're talking about here, but the rates of suicide are increasing in the 10 to 14-year-old age range as well, probably the same for you all in the UK. And that if we're going to focus on prevention, we need to realize that we need to start focusing prevention in the earliest of our grade schools. That waiting until kids are in high school or college is oftentimes too late. Their social bonds have degraded, their relationships with their parents have degraded, and their self-esteem has degraded by then. Part of the challenge as well, contributing to that then, is the role social media has played in disrupting genuine bonds between children and their peers and children and the adults in their lives. If we're going to look at the statistics, we need to make sure that we're going back to the earliest recorded dates within the lifespan. And clearly that indicates we need to start looking at the disruption at a very early age for both boys and girls, and the impact that socialization has on the ultimate development of self-harm and suicide.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much, Risa. Did anybody want to respond to Risa?
I think that the suicide statistics and statistics that surround this whole subject, they really need quite urgent overhaul, because certainly in the UK the statistics are out of date. They can't get statistics quick enough, because by the time you've gone through an inquest process to determine whether or not the coroner has decided a suicide, and then that's published, it's usually at least 2 years out of date. And in the case of my daughter Molly, we're heading towards 3.5 years, and we're really pleased that we've got a very supportive coroner who has kept her inquest open, and he seems determined to want to learn as much from poor Molly's case about the effects of social media and the effects it might have had on her mental health. But her death can't be included in any suicides because it's been going on so long. So I think there needs to be another set of statistics, another set of studies that look into this and keep things much more up to date. The trouble with short-term studies is they might prove to be less accurate than the long-term studies, but we're working with data that's, as I say, at least 2 years out of date, and it's very difficult to spot trends and know what to do with it.
I'd be very interested in hearing what Louise has to say from her social epidemiological perspective, because what I'm hearing and what I've seen, particularly as we're now becoming a bit more conscious of looking at history of internet searches, is that we've been able to take the point of death and trace it back maybe a few months or a year with regards to term searches. But what I really would love to see is going back even longer, like Hope was talking about with her sister. What are the search terms that the 14-year-olds using that might first set off a red flag? What type of searches are they looking at that might predispose them to an increased risk within the next subsequent years? So, Louise, I don't know if that's something you've run across, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So that's not necessarily something in the area of social epidemiology, but that's something that somebody that the OLLIE Foundation has been working closely with, has been looking into. So there's an organization called Ripple Suicide Prevention, and they're working to be able to pick up on like a Google tool that picks up when somebody is beginning to search terms that might be harmful for them. So I think that's more about almost like active prevention for people. But if you're looking backwards in terms of data, yeah, I think that's just a massive area that we all need to look a bit closer into. It's a really tricky one, definitely.
We've got a whole range of issues here, haven't we? We've got the appalling fact that we don't record ethnicity. We have the wrong data because it's always 2 or 3 years out of date. We never actually seem to have current data, although I think people are putting things in the chat about real-time surveillance. Risa, you're telling us we need to be proactive much earlier on. One of the things for me that I was always struck about, and I wonder if anyone here, perhaps Bonnie, if you have any thoughts on this, is that the other thing that we don't seem to record in terms of public health is when someone has tried to take their life and thankfully not succeeded. But we all know that somebody is at significant risk having attempted to end their life by suicide, and yet we don't record that.
And that's where the data is actually so kind of misled, really, because actually there is evidence to say that women are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, but that's what is recorded is 1 in 4 deaths by suicide are by women. We're not looking at actually what would that figure have been in reality. And you know, looking at things like, well, people who have self-harmed are 30 times higher than other young people, actually, who in the general population, they're more likely to actually think about suicide. Speaking about what Reese was saying about bringing in, I suppose, the conversation into much younger age group it's vital. And if we can't open up that conversation amongst us as adults, actually, how can young people even think about, how can they actually even think about having that conversation? And I think it is that stigma, it is because there are young people, and sadly over the last year, we've seen that safe space where numbers have rocketed in cases of self-harm and with girls and with actually eating disorders, But with that, we have to understand if 30% of them are more likely to think about suicide, how many more cases are there going to be in the near future? And so actually proper recording, proper evidenced recording of these cases need to be in place. More research has to be put in place, clearer reports. I know, Ian, you mentioned about data that's 2 or 3 years old. I was looking at that 2018 with the last figures we could find, where actually there was an increase by 27.5% of women and suicide. And that was after actually a year before of a 24.3% decline. So there's something to really look at. Why was there this massive increase over 1 year of women and suicide? So I think there is a severe lack of data collection, and also where, Jean, you were talking about ethnicity not being recorded, which is shocking. Actually, it's worth even thinking. It's very important to think about what cultural attitudes are towards suicide. So where you have communities who don't want their family member to be actually for a coroner's report to say they have taken their own life, and sadly that is often the case in some communities, where they will actually rather have a coroner's report that says this was death by accident, even though it was actually suicide. So there's a lot of misreporting happening also because of sadly taboo and stigma within communities itself.
I was going to add that I think a lot of the data needs to be contextualised as well. And we know that austerity in the UK has had a big impact on women disproportionately. We know anecdotally since the COVID pandemic, again, that's disproportionately affecting women because of all the social stresses that they have as well. But it's almost like they don't get the recognition that they deserve. And this is historical. So that although as a mental health act manager, I predominantly see men, when women are appealing against their section or having their section renewed, when you look at the reports and you look at their history, there's often trauma from early childhood, but there's also often domestic violence or some, real issues of social inequalities and social injustices that are impacting on them as well, that often I don't think we take enough consideration of. And I see it a lot with my students. I mean, I train social workers, but actually social workers are no different to anybody else, as are nurses, some of the things that they are juggling and experiencing. And then, if they're women and they're Black, that's an extra thing to have to deal with on top of that. So I think we need more contextualized stats, but also interpretation of the stats as well.
I think it's an important point with the interpretation of the information we're getting, because kind of going back to the broader question about gender, looking at how sort of high profile incidents are received in the news, there is a disparity in how women's death by suicides are seen as opposed to men's death by suicides. So for example, Caroline Flack, who died last year, if you Google her, it says died by hanging, and we all know what happened there. But if you Google Mike Thalasitis, who was a celebrity on the same program as her, who took his own life, it says died by suicide. And for me, looking at those two differences, it really makes me think, are we finding it as society easier are we wanting to gloss over women's pain? Is it less palatable to see a woman take her own life than to see a man take his own life? And it sounds like quite a stark question, but I think that, when things happen like that in the media, it is a really good magnification of how things are interpreted on a personal level for everybody else.
I'm thinking now about of all the things you've shared so far. What messages do we see? So, Risa, you were saying we need earlier intervention, clearer messages. But what messages are out there in the public? We have lots of sort of, it's okay to be okay, not to be okay, and just talk, and all these lovely messages and phrases that encourage us to reach out. What have you seen that's particularly useful, or what are you aware of that has been really useful and targeted to women? And do you think some of the targeted messages that we have should be more universal? So a couple of questions there, so take your pick on any of them.
I don't know if you guys have the commercial. It's a PSA. It's called Embrace the Awkward. And I can't remember the organization that produced it, but I know there's one PSA where there's two girls sitting on the couch, and something's going on with one girl clearly, and the other girl wants to ask, but she can't. And then this guy pops up between the couch cushions and says, "Embrace the awkward, ask what's going on." And it's a really lovely PSA. But from my perspective, focusing on socio-emotional support and proactive support, I think social media has done a great detriment in promoting this sort of best possible shiny face rather than authentic connections. And for women in particular, the competitiveness that's always been there around attractiveness and so forth becomes heightened, and our aversion to vulnerability and disclosure becomes that much more heightened as well. And so when we're focusing on messaging, personally, I think the messages have to come across as authentic, eyeball to eyeball, not shiny, media hyped, overly produced messaging. And it's that level of authenticity I believe we have to get back to before we're comfortable actually discussing some of the really hard topics like self-harm or suicide or the death of a loved one by suicide. And that message and that admonishment to be genuine has to start at those early grades, because even in third grade, kids are getting on Instagram and Snapchat, and it's skewing the way they interact with their peers.
For sure. Shanice, did you still want to come in, or?
Yeah, it was a link to what you said about the movements, like it's okay not to be okay, because there's lots of body positive movements like Dove do the Real Beauty campaign, and there's the This Girl Can and the Be a Lady They Said, which I actually posted about today. But I think all of these things are like, they're targeted at women more, but they're still not addressing the suicide, which kind of goes back to what Louise said about, are we glossing over women's pain? Because we're addressing the mental health, but we're not talking about the elephant in the room. We're not talking about suicide. And maybe that's why women don't feel as able to come out and say they're struggling with suicidal ideation or thoughts or self-harm. Because it's good addressing the general mental health, but ultimately, if it leads to suicide, that's what we need to be addressing sooner.
Thank you. Jean, please come in.
I think it differs at different times. I mean, when I went back to work after a year of being off work, and because I teach mental health, I decided to tell my students what had happened. And it really opened up a safe space for people to talk, and people did share their own experiences privately. But I know from personal experience, and I think it's quite common to get suicidal thoughts. I think that's one thing we need to get out there, that it's not abnormal, you're not mad. We all have times of deep despair. But I've experienced about 3 times when I really actively wanted to die. And I describe it as being at the bottom of a deep, deep hole and very dark, and I couldn't pull myself up. Now, if someone had texted me at that point and said, "Are you okay?" I couldn't have said I was. So a pact I had with a friend is that I would just text her, we'd have a common word and she would know. Because I think one of the things with the way we communicate now, which I haven't found helpful, is texting. You know, it's a safe distancing tool that people sometimes use. They can tick a box, I've checked Jean's all right. But actually, it's sometimes something you can't respond to, because if you're feeling deep despair, you often haven't got the energy to respond and say you're okay when you're not, but you want to reach out, but you can't. So it's finding a way. That's what really concerns me, when someone's really in that dark space. And I know the OLLIE Foundation do a lot of work around this. It's how can you help people in that, at that point? For me, that's quite significant.
Thank you, Jean.
And
Bonnie, sorry, Bonnie, go.
Oh, just
Please
very
go
quickly,
ahead.
I wanted to add actually from what Louise and Shanice said about the very tragic death of Caroline Black, actually talking about campaigns and messages that we are hearing and listening, what actually eclipsed her tragic death was Be Kind movement, the anti-bullying campaigns, and that's all very worthy and very good, but actually I don't recall seeing one headline saying women in suicide, let's talk about this. As you know, it's tragic but actually what an opportunity that would have been for everyone to be able to say, actually, let's talk about this, because we don't. Giving that space to women and girls to say, actually only in the last few days, in the past week, just bringing the subject up with different people and different women, a couple have actually said, you know, I felt really suicidal at that point in my life, or, you know, when I was this age, I actually had suicide ideation. And, you know, it just opening up the conversation gives somebody that validation, that safe space to be able to say, yes, I have had those thoughts too. But you're right, glossing over, Louise, are we doing that with women? Are we saying, actually, these are the resilient sex, these are the ones that can do everything. They can run a house and have a career and have babies and all of that. Can we actually see them not cope? Can we actually, as a society, look at them and say, you know what? Maybe it's all right for women to say, I cannot cope, it's too much, I need help. And not to feel that we have to stand up to this image of the all, you know, jazz hands can do everything woman. So yeah, no, I do think that there isn't enough, I haven't seen any campaign or any platform where women feel they can relate to in terms of this subject.
Hope, I know you wanted to come in, and Louise too.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I completely agree with you, Bonnie, about, you know, like there's no direct campaign relating to women and suicide. I think the one that, you know, we were talking about glossing over, and my question is maybe that, is it the media are scared of the reaction that they may get if they are full direct, you know, about suicide? I know that, I think it's the Samaritans that had one about the Ask Twice campaign. So it wasn't gender specific, and it was about on a train track, you know, and asking twice if you saw something or someone that you thought might not have been okay. And I thought actually that's such a really good message, that ask twice. And going on from what you said, Jean, about, you know, you attempting suicide and having that kind of code word with your friends, I think that's such an important message. And that you talked about being in that dark hole. You know, I think the statistics is something like you're 3 times more likely to take your own life if you had someone in your family die by suicide. And I myself actually tried to attempt my suicide once my sister went, and it was similar to what you were saying, Jean, about that dark hole. I describe it as a mentor and Harry Potter, you know, those dark, like ghosty things, and it was kind of like sucking the face out of me. And what you were saying, Jean, is, you know, having that word, that code word to say, you know, sometimes my friends would be like, are you okay, Hope? And I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. Because I actually didn't have the energy to go, I actually need your help. You know, that, and people might think, well, all you need to do is just go blah, 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 blah. But I didn't actually have the mental energy to discuss how I was feeling and ask for that help. So I think what you were saying, Jean, with having that word with your friends, you know, when you're in that better place and you're not in that dark hole, is actually a really good point to have. And it's something that I never even thought about having with my friends, that actually going, if I said this word, you know, they'll know that that's a direct indication that they need to ask twice, which relates back to that campaign that the Samaritans done. So, yeah.
I think that's so great. I also think that the question that Shanice and Bonnie was asking about are we able to talk about women in suicide? Are we able to even have that conversation? Are we ready to have that conversation? And I think that some of the news that came out today with Meghan and Harry's interview with Oprah has shown pretty clearly that we're not able to have that conversation, because Meghan, you know, a woman of wealth, she's got power, she's in the public eye. When she said, oh, I was feeling suicidal, the British media within hours were saying, we don't believe you, or she's just saying that for attention. And that just really shows a response to how women's pain is minimized. And to borrow some words off my colleague Vicky was saying, when we were talking about this, we were saying, you know, the phrase, oh, they're just doing it for attention, or it's a cry for help. It is a cry for help, and they are doing it for attention, but they want loving attention. And people, you know, women need the compassionate attention that we're able to outpour after somebody's died. So after Caroline's died, we're able to say, oh yeah, we need to be kind, we're really anti-bullying. But when somebody's saying, I'm hurting right now, or I was hurting, we're not able to talk about it, which is really difficult.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you so much for that. So I'm wondering, panel, we're getting a few threads now of things that maybe we could do differently. Hope you shared, you know, the one campaign that seemed quite useful was the Ask Twice. And I'm just wondering what messages might, you know, if you were able to design something, or you were able to change the way we're doing things now, what would you have people do and say and be able to see?
I'll jump in there from a charity's perspective, and not sort of a personal perspective. I would sort of be agreeing with Risa about, you know, we need to be proactive instead of reactive, and that message would be directly at young people. And I think Risa makes a great point that actually, you know, we should be starting in primary schools, you know, and getting young people to have that conversation. So my campaign would be aimed at young people and getting them to have the conversation and be open. And I think, Jean, you were saying about, you know, you're very honest with, is it your students? I can't remember what you said, but your students, that you're very honest and you share your experience. And I think being part of a school myself, I think some teachers are scared to have a conversation and be open and raw with their students, because there's that sort of line where I have to be professional, you're the student, I'm the teacher, and that sort of goes everything I'm against with, whereas I actually do share my story with students. So I have sometimes on my work uniform, I might have a pin badge, and I share it with my secondary school students. They go, what's that? And I tell them, and immediately I've got that rapport. I feel that I've got that rapport with them for them to go, do you know what? And I had a student actually tell me before Christmas that they have a sister who's struggling right now. And it gave her that conversation to be opening up to me. And if it wasn't for me being so open and honest as a teacher, I don't think that student would have come forth. So I think definitely the message is that we guys, how can we expect young people to be open if we're not open ourselves? So it's really important to sort of start that conversation early in primary school, or if not in year 7 at secondary school, you know, and not sort of sugarcoat them and go, can I talk about this conversation? It's the terminology we use. You know, if I use sort of mental ill health, I would say that to a year 7 or year 8 student. But if I'm talking to someone who's in year 5, and Risa, I'm not sure if you know year 5, 6 in UK, but that's sort of your sort of 9, 10-year-olds, I would say mental well-being, and how do we sort of, you know, we feel happy and we feel sad. And that terminology, we just kind of make it kind of flower over it as such, you know, for a year 5, if someone in year 5 or year 6, but actually we're still having that hard topic of conversation, which is it's okay to not be okay, and we should be talking about these conversations.
I know both Bonnie and Risa want to come in, Hope, so thank you. Risa, would you like to pick up the baton?
Sure. So when I look from a clinical psychology perspective at how we address most mental health needs in our system, and I believe your system is pretty similar to what we have in the US, Essentially, it's a wait to be identified approach. So you either come forward with your problems or somebody refers you and you go. And then when you receive your services and then you exit your services and you go on with your life. This is horrible. I mean, this works for that small percentage of people who feel comfortable coming forward and that small percentage of people who are forced to come forward. What this leaves out is that huge wide berth of people who want a more graduated entry into the mental health care system or who have a need but don't feel comfortable reaching out to anybody. So we have this huge part that is the phase one, the preventative aspect of it. And we have this whole segment of the population that leaves our mental health care system with nothing other than the tools that were working for them at that given time. So they go back out and it's almost as though they are left with the message that you should never experience challenges again. And if you do, you should know how to address them because I've taught you these skills. And we don't fortify people and we don't teach them to expect that they're still going to experience difficult times. So from my perspective, our messaging is we need to blow up the system and start over again. We need to focus on primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention. Okay, maybe we're doing all right. And then we've got to focus on aftercare. And all of our messaging around that has to take place. So my organization, Amica, is working on that early prevention part. How do we share those messages? Well, we make, through Amica, we crowdsource messages of goodwill and we share them with others preemptively so that if you're like experiencing one of those super down times and you don't want to talk to someone right then, even if they ask you twice, you have 100 messages from people who wish you well, that if you're thinking maybe I don't have any place in this world or I'm a burden to everyone, you've got those messages to fall back on before you sink all the way down to the bottom of the abyss. And until we could address particularly women who need that sort of social support eye to eye, even more than men who maybe can get it in the basketball game, we need to start sharing preemptively and proactively and focus on the positive psychology part in maintaining wellness and teach children how to do that with one another before they reach the tertiary care stage. So my soapbox, so sorry, I get a little passionate about that, but I think it's very important that we start addressing those early on and think differently about mental wellness.
And for anyone on the call that hasn't already Googled Amica and RISA, because clearly everyone is going to be reaching out to you, we will put all those details in the resource pack, so you'll have all those contact details. But Bonnie, I know you wanted to come in here. Bonnie, you're on mute, I think, somehow. We've managed to mute you.
Sorry, I just wanted to echo what Risa just said, actually. And actually, we can't start early enough. The earlier we start talking to children, and actually one doesn't have to say to a year one student and talk about suicide. We can talk about mental health, even in reception year, as early as possible, and to help children understand that their mental health is as valid as their physical health. If that conversation can be brought in early enough, not just with schools and what schools are actually offering, but in the home. So if this conversation is much more open in the home as well, what I'm working on now with a secondary and a primary school is developing a resource, some sort of leaflet. It's actually in light of the BLM movement and working on mental health in Black communities, actually looking at our service. Why are we not seeing many Black girls, Black boys coming to the service? And I always say, if you don't see something and you think that's odd, we need to go out and look for it. We need to ask the questions, saying, what is it that we're not doing? Why are you not coming for help? So with young children, they don't have that articulation to know there's something wrong. They're not feeling too good. They're feeling, sad or isolated or lonely. They can't articulate that. So we need to go into the schools. We need to ask those questions and actually train people, train teachers more, train people within the school environment to learn more about and understand how can we broach the subject with children as young as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and with secondary adolescents and teenagers. But No, completely what you're saying, Reese. You cannot start young enough in terms of opening up that conversation about mental health and how important it is for all of us.
I think thinking about it as same as we do with our physical health. I mean, we all probably, I assume most of you aren't anti-vaxxers. You bring your kids in to get their inoculations. You feed them healthy foods. You make sure they're sleeping and taking their baths. It's no different with mental wellness. We need to make sure that we're bolstering their mental wellness, and we don't just take it as a given. We don't just assume all our kids are doing okay. We have to mentally and emotionally and behaviorally bolster them the same as we do anybody else. And if they have an illness, then we have to make sure they recuperate, and we check in on them and make sure they don't have remissions. And we continue to emphasize good mental hygiene as well as physical hygiene.
I can see we've got lots of people coming in. So I know, Louise, you wanted to come in, and then Ian and Jean. Louise, I think you were next.
I'll just make a really quick point about going back to the sort of the public health messaging and like any campaigns in that type of way. I feel like one fact that I always think of in terms of suicide is the fact that there are now more deaths by suicide than there are by road traffic accidents in the UK on year. And, you know, there were really big campaigns, really huge, simple campaigns like, you know, having your 5 a day, wearing your seatbelt, basic stuff that we now all accept as a normal part of life. And if we could have a campaign that was, or like another one that I think of is the See It, Say It Sorted, which is on like the trains. But if we could have something that was similar to the Safe Talk training, which was talk, ask, listen, keep safe. If that was as normal as having your 5 a day, that would just be an ideal scenario, I think.
Oh, thank you. Ian, I know you wanted to come in too.
I was just going to say, I think just hearing this conversation is fascinating, and starting early enough is a point that keeps coming up, and it reminded me of the school, the infant school that all 3 of my daughters went to, including Molly. I went there and gave a talk after Molly died, and we were trying to find ways to bring into the classroom chat about mental well-being and mental health so that young children could sort of cope with it. And I thought there'd be a lower limit to that. And I was corrected by the teaching staff, because they said, no, we'll start from the very first year group that come in, the reception class, the youngest people in the school. And it's probably a technique that's used very widely, but they put little posters on the wall, and every day when the children came in, the youngest of children, they had a sort of icon badge that they put on these posters, and the posters had a happy face and a cross face and a grumpy face and an upset face, or a face with a tissue because they were ill. And the youngsters didn't mind where they put there. They didn't mind if people knew they were cross or grumpy, and what happened was, during the day they noticed that the youngsters would go and move their icon from happy to sad sometimes, if that's what they want. And it was a very natural thing to do. And then they noticed that some of the other children would notice that had happened, and they'd go out and put their arms around that young child and say, well, what's wrong? Why are you now sad? You were happy earlier, in some basic way. And that to me is a thing. I think it's all part of something that we had when we were young. You would talk about the way you felt, and then we learnt that perhaps we shouldn't, and we learnt there's a stigma attached, and we learnt social ways of behaving that mean we lost that ability. And it's trying to keep people in touch with that, I think, is so important.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, simple way of showing that emotions change. You can come in and out of things and they'll change again. You must have been very happy to have seen that, Ian.
Yes.
Jean.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that example, Ian, and I think it's sometimes characterised British culture, the stiff upper lip, you know, don't share your feelings. And, you know, sometimes when you do, and you see the look of horror, you know, when you do with certain people. But also building on what Risa said about there's a lack of parity between mental health and physical health. And although the government purports to be addressing this, they're not. Because in the area where I work, in terms of the NHS work, and also work for a private hospital, in order for you to get support, there has to be such a high threshold that's met. It's no longer enough to be suicidal and risk to yourself to get admitted to a psychiatric unit to keep you safe. you know, you have to have made a serious attempt. So it's looking at what can we do? And even in primary health, the common thing is to refer people for CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. That doesn't work for a lot of people. Actually, if you feel sad, you don't want to dismiss you feel sad. You want to get to the reasons why. But one of the things I was going to share was what I've learned is the importance of self-love and self-care, you know, in terms of just basic things, you know, like having a nice shower, or one thing that's really kept me going is exercise and walking. You know, do 10 miles a week at least. And when you're out there in nature, and I know there's a lot of research that talks about the benefit, but also walking with a friend, because sometimes when you have counselling, it's very face-to-face, but my counsellor actually was telling me about another counsellor who's actually working with someone that's got autism. Now, he finds eye contact difficult, so they're actually having counselling out walking side by side. And I think you can have conversations sometimes much more easily when you're not making direct eye contact. So it's looking at all those things and more informal support for people, you know, droppings or whatever it might be. Or, you know, I mentioned maybe free spa day vouchers or whatever, because I know when I go to the spa, I feel so much better. So it's those things that maybe we take for granted, but are very important, you know, keeping it very simple.
Thank you.
Just going on from that, Jean, I think it's so important. Like, my one thing is, I think the hardest part in all of this is speaking out and asking for help. You know, there's so much stigmatized for men and women. You know, if you speak out, you know, it's weak, and, you know, you're considered weak in your head and whatever anyone else is saying. And as you said, that there is a waiting list. You know, I think the CAMS for children's mental health is about 6 months. And as you said, you have to have a serious suicide attempt. Now, what that's telling me is that in that young person's head is, I told you I'm not good enough. You know, those voices in your head, if anyone's sort of had them and you're fighting against each other, is it's telling them that they're not worthy and that they're still, you know, I still can't even kill myself as such, you know, and someone isn't helping me. And I think it's so important that that funding, and, you know, we've talked about the 79 million that's been sort of pledged from the government, and having counselling at schools. And that's something that the Grace Deer Trust provide in Surrey. There's already actually a waiting list in Surrey for children that need support. You know, if we've got CAMS that's got a 6-month waiting list, and you can't even be seen, you know, and that's not even be seen to seeing a counsellor, that's seen to have an assessment. And then you've got, you know, that obstacle. There seems to be so many obstacles in place for us to be supporting our mental health. You know, if I broke my arm, I go to A&E, you know, I get an X-ray, perfect, it is broken. Sort of 6 weeks later, cast comes off. And then if I need physiotherapy, it's done, completed, you know, I get on my way. Whereas there seems to be so many barriers in place for mental health. One, I struggle to speak out. When I do, you know, it feels like a weight lifted off my shoulder, but then bang, there's a barrier. Oh, I can't see someone because my mental health isn't as severe. Okay. And then there's another barrier. I see a counsellor, or I finally get seen. And then, you know, we're all different. I mean, I saw, I think, 6 counsellors before I found the right one. Now, in a young person's mental head, and even in an adult, I sort of gave up in myself, going, you know, or I can't find the right person. That's another barrier in my way to actually finding out and talking how I'm feeling. And but at this point, we're talking about a month, 2 months into this process, and that you have to go round and round again in this circle. So I think it's so important that, you know, going back to Risa's point, and I think, Bonnie, you touched upon it about training teachers, and that's something that we're working with OLLIE to do at the moment, is sort of getting teachers trained in mental health first aid, so that they can spot these early signs before it reaches the point where we're at that barrier of, I need to see a counsellor. You know, these teachers have spotted that way before that, and we can actually talk about those emotions before it gets to that point, and before we have to sort of start overcoming these obstacles and barriers in place. So yeah.
Thank you. And Shanice, I know you had your hand up a moment ago. Did you still want to come in?
Yeah, just I really agree with what you're saying with that. Like from first-hand experience, you go you go to the hospital and you wear your heart on your sleeve as such. You tell them exactly how you're feeling. You do the whole, you're honest, you're open. You do everything everybody's telling you to do, but it's not enough because you might not have acted upon the thoughts, and it does make you think, so the thoughts are not enough, and it does push you to like a crisis point, a desperate point, and it's like, well, what do I need to do for you to take me seriously? And it's like you can't win. So I think with addressing it a lot earlier down the line, it prevents that from happening, and I think that's what we need to work towards, because nobody deserves to be at that crisis point.
I don't think we could have ended with a better comment, Shanice, so thank you so much. We've just gone slightly over the hour, and I think, well, I could listen to you guys talk all evening, but we did promise the audience that they would have an opportunity to pose some questions. So I'm going to come to Vicky. Vicky, this is your sort of 2-second warning. I don't know if you have any questions from the audience that you're able to pose, but before you do that, I wanted to ask our incredible panel, if there was one thing that you would want our audience to think about or to consider as a result of this evening, what would you want your message to be? I feel awful picking on anyone, so does anyone want to raise their? I see Risa's sort of ready.
Always ready to chomp at the bit. I use the analogy with compassion as, let's say you have just lost somebody, or you just got out of the hospital. Who would you see as more compassionate? The individual who says, call me if you need anything, or the individual who drops by unprompted with a casserole just to hold your hand? I think when we consider the way we interact with others, we need to look at providing proactive compassion. Even though someone may rebuff us, part of the problem there is they just don't know how to accept compassion. So if we continue to provide it to them unrequested, we will eventually develop a more compassionate society. And I think that sets a firm foundation for how we move forward in promoting mental wellness.
Thank you. You're getting a round of applause up there in the gallery, I see, Risa.
Could I follow on for that? Because my point very much links on from that. Instead of showing empathetic distress, and that is, and I had a lot of this in terms of, oh my gosh, I feel your pain and it's so painful, I've got to go. What you need to show is empathetic concern, and that's having a proactive action plan, like Risa said. Don't give the person the responsibility of, if you need me, I'm here. Call me anytime. Be, as you say, Risa, proactive. And the amount of times that has helped me in terms of someone's left a cake or a card during lockdown, that's just brought a light into my life when I felt really dark. And you never forget that kindness. And there's always someone there, always someone that cares. Often it can be a stranger. You know, the smile, someone, the way people look at you, you know, that can make all the difference. So don't underestimate that.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share a thought before we go to questions?
I guess I'd just like to mention that what I'd like people to take from this is to take like a radical questioning of the disconnect between, I mean, building on from Risa and Jean's points about saying, oh, be kind, or it's okay not to be okay, all of that type of thing, the disconnect between that and people, you know, ignoring or finding it difficult to connect with the people that are in crisis. Because I love this phrase, but the hardest ones to love are the ones who need it most. People in crisis are not that, they're not that lovable, or they're not, you know, it's hard sometimes to give that love to people. But I think that, yeah, questioning the disconnect between those two sentiments is really important. And I think people should take that from this talk.
Thank you.
And I also think that there's probably less to be afraid of than you may think. If you're dealing, if you're worried about someone and you don't know how to deal with it, I think quite often inaction comes from, I might make it worse. And I think I've learned in the last 3.5 years that that's if you have that empathy and you have that care, and you listen to people and you meet them where they are, it's almost impossible to make it worse. And the worst thing you can do is just sit back and go, oh, I don't quite know, I won't do anything. Even if you haven't had any training or anything, just be a bit human and connect with someone and listen and talk, and you'll help and make it better.
Thank you, Ian. Vicky, have you had a chance to look through the chat, and would you like to share any questions with the panel?
Hi everyone. Yeah, the chat has been wonderful this evening. Just a huge thanks to everybody for all of the support and resources that you've shared on there. So huge thank you. And I've been looking out for questions, and as we've been going on, you've actually been answering lots of them. We had questions about at what age is it safe to begin talking to young people about suicide and self-harm. That was one question that Laura posed, and hope you picked up on that from your experience of being a teacher. A couple of outstanding questions. The first was, are there any books that any of you would recommend for youngsters on mental health and mental illness? That was the first one, and some people have already been putting those in the chat. If there's anything that anybody would like to offer, that would be great.
Well, I know, Jean, you have actually just published a book, though I'm not entirely sure that is but it's a good moment to talk about your book. Do you want to give us a 2-second?
Yeah, it's only a chapter in the book. I'm not the editor, but what it is reflections on my own experience, and saying that, and it's building upon what Bonnie said a lot about. You know, she said earlier about Black communities, why didn't they come forward for help? And it's because of the stigma, and it's also because they're overrepresented in the in the mental health system, and they're more likely to be sectioned and stuff. But I think it's about the need for culturally sensitive and appropriate services, being able to share your lived experiences and shared vulnerability. So it's from social workers of colour, from the global majority communities, and it's all different things. You know, there's poetry, there's stories, and I've obviously referenced the OLLIE Foundation, so I will show you the copy. I've only got 2 copies, but it's just come out. So if you're interested, it's something I'd highly recommend.
Thank you. And while the panel is still thinking, I've got 2 recommendations for you. So a book that has just been so important to me, a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. And if you're sitting comfortably, I'll give you a little summary. It's of a child who notices a little dragon, and every time he tries to tell his mum, she says, there's no such thing as a dragon. And I think you can see where this is going. Every time mum denies the dragon gets bigger. And it gets so big that in the end, the whole house is consumed by the dragon. The moment the adults in this child's life recognize, oh yeah, there's a dragon, the dragon starts to shrink and become manageable. So I always find that book very useful. And another one that I use a lot in my adult training as well is The Bag of Worries. If you've not come across that, that's a lovely book for younger children that allows them to understand that, again, this bag gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You keep putting your worries in it, but then you're dragging this huge sack about. So they're both delightful books. Does anyone else have any recommendations?
Mine, The Best Day of Life Workbook. I wrote during my midlife crisis. I found myself in the hospital for over a week, wondering how I could have reached the point where I almost killed myself and my son due to a medical event that I refused to acknowledge. I've used it a lot with my counseling and psychotherapy students to help them get past their own issues with vulnerability and imposter syndrome, help them find their own life paths that are not necessarily only predicated on what their parents wanted. So when I look at some of the stressors that young people, particularly my college students, are under today, and what makes them most unhappy and feeling most hopeless, it has to do with their inability to figure out what they want to do with their lives or to advocate for themselves against some of the pressures that their parents, who usually have their best interests in mind, are nevertheless pushing them towards.
Thank you, Risa. We will make sure both Jean, Risa, your book details go out in the resource pack to everyone.
I can follow up with a list of books at some point. I don't know whether that can be sent out to delegates, but I most certainly can liaise with Safe Space and come up with that. But for the older readers, the adolescents, I'd say Matt Haig would highly recommend his books.
That would be great, Bonnie. We'd really love those recommendations if Safe Space would be kind enough to share them with everyone.
I've also done some wonderful guides, actually, which were sent out to all schools across Hertfordshire. So that's another thing that I can probably ask them to share. That would be great, and or links, however you want to do. Absolutely, no problem. Yeah, the more we collaborate and share what we're doing, the better, I think. Yeah. Vicky, were there any other questions?
We've had not very many questions, so I do invite you, if you do want to pop questions in the chat, do feel free to. We've had so much input, which has been fantastic. Laura did have she said that she would love to see this become more of a regular themed discussion. I think so many people have said there's so much value here. Is there any way that we could extend this debate and hold future discussions like this?
Well, that is music to our ears. This morning we were on the NHS did a huge, it's unbelievable, the event they held day to day, and they launched something called Courageous Coffee. And I was saying to Vicky and Louise, I love the idea of that, and also to our colleague Debbie, who I think is in the room as well. So we want to have these Courageous Coffee sessions, and yes, we will, if the panel want to drop in sometimes, and we'll let you know about that. But that's great that you've raised that, because we were thinking the same thing. So yes, we will make that happen.
And so currently that brings us to the end of questions that were asked, but this is your opportunity now. If anyone wants to direct message me and ask a question anonymously, please feel free to do that, and I can ask that question for you too. Oh, here we go. We've got one from Leonora. What to do when you worry too much? A great, oh, that's a book recommendation there. Thank you. Thanks, Leonora. It's brilliant.
Oh.
Can I make one more point that I just, because I shared my book, that made me think about some of the challenges that I've addressed with some of my college students, and Jean, and hope you may have noticed the same in your students. The students that I see who are experiencing the most challenges at college or university are the ones who feel the greatest amount of pressure. And as a recovering helicopter parent myself, I know I have aggravated the mental health of my own children by doing this. But particularly like right now in the US, college has become so much more expensive. Student loans are astronomical. Jobs, particularly since COVID, are getting harder and harder to find, that students feel like there is one, maybe two career choices that will promote a positive future for them. And everything else they're pushing below the surface. They're so focused on competitiveness, studying 24/7, and removing all the positive aspects of their life and the joie de vivre they should be experiencing as college students, that it's really to the point where all work and no play not only make Jack the dull boy, but extraordinarily depressed and oftentimes suicidal girl or boy. And so I want to stress to any parents out there who may have been like myself and pressuring your students without realizing that even your perfect straight A popular kids can be withering inside and their mental health can be suffering, to please be kind to your children as well. Recognize that they may be putting on their best faces for you too, so that you don't recognize what pain they're experiencing, because they don't want to burden you and because they want to hear you bragging about them to your friends. So extend the compassion and the empathy to your children and your students, and check in with them, making sure that they understand what they want from their lives, and you advocating for that as well.
Thank you. I think that would have been very, very warmly received by everyone in the room. Thank you so much, Risa. One of the things that I'd like to share, which is maybe slightly off topic, but it's not, we didn't touch on it so much, but we know that young women are fairly prolific in the data with self-harming and maybe struggling with depression. And we see the impact of COVID. One of the things that the OLLIE Foundation is now working on, and we're very, very happy to collaborate with anyone here who's in the room, so please reach out. But we are setting up a pilot. We have the support of Public Health and our local MP. We want to triangulate the support that somebody will get. So when they reach out, when they make that appointment to speak to their doctor and speak about their depression, and when in consultation with their doctor, it is agreed that antidepressants are the way forward right now. What we want, like the simple campaigns that Louise mentioned earlier, we want it to be just the same as if you were getting an antibiotic. This is the right medicine for you, but let's be clear on the side effects. Because if you get a little bit of an upset tummy with an antibiotic, we all know that can happen. If you get a rash, you want to be seeking support straight away and talking to your clinician. What many of you on the call might not know is that within the first few weeks of starting antidepressants, not despite them, but because of them, somebody's anxiety, somebody's depression, and suicidal thinking can deteriorate. In fact, suicidal thinking come on as a side effect of antidepressants. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be taking them necessarily, that's another discussion, but this is the work we want to do now, so that when someone goes to their GP, the GP will start off what we and lots of people in suicide prevention talk about is a safe plan, but they will just start it. The triangulation comes when that is completed with the chemist, with the prescriber. And so we start to build this community of people that are having conversations. Almost, we're not asking twice now, we're asking 3 times. And we're making sure not only have we asked, but there is a plan in place that that person owns. They know what they're going to do. So if that's something that feels useful to anyone and you'd like a wider discussion on that, please reach out to us.
Debbie, there's been a couple of questions that have come up in quick succession. Two people who are listening who are on the front line. One is a mental health student nurse, the other is a police officer working with people in crisis, both asking what advice would you give them for talking with their patients, with talking about suicide with people that they're meeting in their field of work.
Would anyone like to respond?
I could jump in really quickly there. I think that the advice that I would give, I think there's a lot that we could say here, and I think that with a little plug for what the OLLIE Foundation does, our course Talk Safe, Plan Safe is 90 minutes, and it's I wouldn't want to say whistle stop tour, but it's basically a really good overview of what you need to know to be able to talk to somebody about suicide. It's free, donations are welcome, but it's free, and it's just a really, really great overview of, you know, it gives you the do's and the don'ts and can really help you in having those conversations. So I'd recommend it.
And just to follow up, we had a course about a week or 10 days ago, and bizarrely we had a lot of call handlers on that call from different crisis lines, and the response was unbelievable. They were saying, we didn't actually know this, we've learned something, and these are people that are handling crisis calls all the time. So I'm just sharing that with you for the officer and the mental health nurse on the line, to let you know that the course really does extend your knowledge and extend what you're doing so well already.
I think that goes a little bit to answer the third question that we've had of somebody that's asking, in light of what Meghan Markle was talking about today, what can we do to reassure and advise people who are talking of suicide and having suicidal thoughts, not just assuming it's just attention seeking? And that is very clearly covered within Talk Safe, Plan Safe, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just ditto that from Debbie on the OLLIE Foundation, because I did go on that course, and I think actually it's such a really quick 90-minute course, and it runs by so quickly, and it does give you those tools that being on the front line, as you say, as being in the police or as a nurse, even sometimes, you know, if you're walking along the street and, you know, you've been on that course, it just gives you the tools and a little bit more confidence to trust your gut. I think it was something that Ian was saying about, have that common sense kind of thing. If you need to ask twice or ask the person if they're okay, it's that little feeling in your gut where you're a bit like, do I ask something? Do I not? And actually that course does give you that a bit more confidence to sort of say, no, I'm going to ask them and see if they're okay.
And one of the things that I think I would say now, that rather than asking someone if they're okay, because the easy answer is to say yes, I'm fine, I think is actually almost, if you've got concerns, it's the best thing to do is say what's wrong, because you've expressed that, the fact that you've noticed something's wrong, you've opened up that chance that they know that they've been spotted as someone who's struggling in some way, and then a person is more likely to talk and not able to dismiss it so easily just simply by answering, oh, I'm fine, which is all too easy to do.
This is going to sound a bit counterintuitive, but I think the best thing that helped me was for people to acknowledge my pain and say, Jean, it's absolute crap, it's shit. And it didn't make me feel worse, it made me feel heard. And then I just wanted to say something in relation to the project that Debbie mentioned and antidepressants. Another key thing is when you're at risk is when you're coming off them and the withdrawals that you get. And when I came off antidepressants, I came off them too quick. And I had really an acute episode of mental health distress. And then my GP said, you need to come off more gradually. But what GPs don't tell you when they prescribe antidepressants is the withdrawal symptoms, which I was really surprised to get.
Risa, did you want to respond to what Bonnie was saying?
Just with regards to the mental health frontline on dispatch officers, police officers, all first responders, that there sometimes is a tendency towards not quite deflection, but sort of subjugating what we're experiencing to help others. And frontline workers, particularly first responders and nurses, have some of the highest increasing rates, at least in the US, of suicide. So I would advocate for both of those professions to find ways to be compassionate with one another within their organizations, as well as with themselves, in addition to making sure that they feel confident and comfortable in dealing with others who seek their assistance.
Thank you for raising that. Vicky.
Hi, we've had another question. And it's a question from Sabrina saying, how do we get Black women who already know that they may not be taken seriously when wanting to seek help from their GP or services? How do we help them to not feel despondent or discouraged by that, and to be able to approach and ask for help and support?
I mean, it sounds obvious that I'll respond to it, but I will, and I can relate to it. And I think if you get a good GP, you're really lucky. And if you are seeing a GP that isn't responding, ask to see somebody else. But I think one of the key things that I feel has helped me is talking to other Black women. It really has helped because I think it is different, because I think we've had to deal with racism. We come across as being strong women, and people often cannot see when we're in absolute despair. And when we are, a lot of people cannot be around that. You know, to see you as not strong it can be very scary. But I think it's starting to have the conversation. But one of the key things is addressing the stigma and the stereotypes. And that's not just Black women, it's women per se. We've talked a lot about the stereotypes around women being nurturers and carers and multitasking, and well, that's your role, isn't it? So I think it's having more open dialogue and supporting each other.
Thank you. Bonnie.
Following from that question, actually, I would highly recommend actually looking at Black Minds Matter UK. They're doing some wonderful work and have actually created quite a fantastic bank of Black therapists to help people who would otherwise, people from the Black community are really struggling to go forward, because there is that. There's the stigma, the taboo, the transgenerational trauma that isn't being talked about. So younger Black people are finding it harder because mental health has not been a conversation necessarily in the home. So this is all coming, you know, bringing that conversation into the open is really important in general, but I would definitely highly recommend BMM UK. They could be quite helpful.
And I think just to add, because it's just come to me in terms of what Bonnie said, I think it's dealing with the microaggressions. I think what we're seeing with Meghan Markle is the microaggressions that she's had to deal with and is still continue to deal with, which are perpetuated by the press as well.
Absolutely. Vicky, did we have any more questions today?
I've got one more question if there's time, from Lisa, who's said that she's recently had a suicide in a college that she works at, and understandably lots of students are on the same course and close friends are really struggling, and that we all know about that sort of the ripple effect and the cascade of impact of suicide on people around them. And how would you reassure them?
I'll go. I would just say is just listening to them. I think I saw in the comments that they felt like they should have done something or been able to spot the signs a little bit more. And I think grieving and this whole circle that we sort of, when we grieve, we go back and forth into this. And in the experience of my sister, that I've always said, and it's been sort of 4 years on, that I could have done more. Now, in a good day, I would be like, no, actually, Hope, there was nothing you could have done. You know, I got the best help that I could for my sister. We talked a lot about, you know, how she was feeling, you know, but on a bad day, those thoughts do come into your head that, you know, I should have been there. I could have saved her. I could have stopped this from happening if it wasn't for this X, Y, and Z. And I think allowing those thoughts to come into your head, for me personally, is quite healthy because it gets them all out straight away. But having someone like yourself at that college is to just be there, listen, reassure them that, you know, these thoughts, I hate to say the word normal, because what is normal now? You know, we live in a society where what is normal? But having those thoughts is okay. And making them be aware that you're not alone and that those thoughts are okay to come into and out of your head. Because I know that sometimes having those thoughts come in, you kind of think, oh, well, I did. Is this okay? Am I feeling okay? You know, should I be feeling this way? And actually the correct term is you're okay to feel how you want. And just having that reassurance to them is probably, I kind of get that I've kind of half answered the question and kind of half not. But there is no right or wrong way to sort of be there for someone, and grieving to someone is just sort of listen, give the best sort of reassurance you can. And if you can comment and sort of share experience without offending that person, then do.
When we deliver our prevention courses, we always give a little note to people, and we remind them that if they have been bereaved by suicide, prevention courses can be quite hard going, because you end up sitting there thinking, oh, I could have done this, or I could have done that. And so we always start our sessions by letting people know that we all do the best we can at the time with the knowledge we have. We also remind people that it is an incredibly complex thing, suicide. And in our Safe Talk sessions, one of the things we learn is that we don't talk about spotting signs, but we do speak about invitations. And it's sort of formed as an invitation to be curious. So things that you might notice that just should make you curious, what's going on here? And the other thing that we let people know is not everyone gets an invitation. And I think somebody mentioned it earlier, that you might be very much the last person to know, or to have been, you know, to be shown anything. And there will be many reasons for that. But we do have to support our students. Anyone bereaved by suicide, it's desperately hard. But for some of our students, they will we've seen before that some students can really struggle with the what ifs and what should I have done. So thank you for that question, and you're right to be concerned, and I hope you've had some answers this evening. I do encourage you to come on Safe Talk and any other kind of intervention program that might support you. How are we doing, Vicky?
Well, we've got one outstanding question, so it'd be really good if we could address it, just because to be inclusive and everybody would have had their question answered. And that's from Julie, and she asks, how do Samaritans help? What do they actually say to people who are suicidal, who are phoning up their helpline?
So as we don't have anyone from the Samaritans here, it will be a little tricky for us to answer on their behalf, but if any of the panel would like to share anything, please do.
So I have personal experience talking to the Samaritans, and one of my close friends volunteered for the Samaritans over a summer, and I think they try to help you there and then in the moment, and this is something that I learned on my assist training, is like looking at how we can help you for now. Like, you don't have to look too far ahead, and they're very upfront. They say they're not going to stop you going through with any action, but what they want to do is help you through that moment and get you through the darkness, if you will. So they're there to listen, they're there to talk. They've heard it all, so there's no judgment. They just want to help you, and you're not alone in that moment, but definitely contact them if you feel you need to.
And I would just like to say Shout and Papyrus are excellent, if you're not aware of them, and a national UK for everyone in the UK. Sorry, Risa. Actually, if anyone can put a spotlight back on Risa, that would be great. Thank you so much. But Hub of Hope is a national online directory, and so you can get to it through our website. Just Google Hub of Hope, and if you know your town or your postcode, you can pop that in, and what you'll get is sort of geographically going outwards all the support that is available, what's nearest to you, and then it will go outwards. So you'll get everything, but it will start with what's closest. So check out Hub of Hope for all the different kinds of support and helplines that might be available to you. But please, please, please do add Shout and Papyrus to your list. Hi, Lisa. I'm sorry you had Wi-Fi problems, but I'm so glad you're back in the room.
Sorry about that.
No, we're just so thrilled you could join us. So where are we now? Vicky, I think we probably need to wrap up and say goodnight to everyone.
Yeah, that brings us to the very end of our questions, so perfect timing, everybody.
Well, can I just say a huge thank you. Suicide is a deeply complex field to work in. I know that many of you start your day every day hoping to make a difference, and some of you have tragically found yourself knowing far more about suicide than you would ever want to know. So I just wanted to thank everybody, to thank our panel. I cannot express enough how incredibly useful this has been. I want to thank everyone that's on the call, that's invested their time in this session. We will definitely be taking up that request to do this again, and we will be sending all the information out to you. There's much to be done, and yeah, we have a lot of work still to do. What I would invite everyone to do is take a moment, maybe think about one thing that you would take away from this event, one thing that you would share with someone else, maybe one thing you'll stop doing, or maybe one thing you'll continue to do, or maybe you've just been inspired to be even stronger in what you're already doing. It is an International Women's Day, and I just want to, just for a moment, just say thank you. I had a slide that I was going to pull up, but sorry, Louise, because I know we've worked hard on it all day, but I'm not going to do that. We'll put it in the resource pack. But there are women in this world of suicide prevention, and men. There are lots of people working incredibly hard and doing such a great job. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and a bit of a shout out to everyone who's working in this field right now. Thank you, Risa, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Debbie, as well.
So, lovely audience, I am going to let you get on with your evening, and we've got your contact details. We know where you are, so you will get the delegate pack. It might not be for this week, maybe the beginning of next week, but we'll get that to you. Thank you, everyone.